Have you ever had a neighbor who just couldn't take no for an answer? Well, meet that HOA Karen who thought she was above the rules, and I was about to give her a lesson she'd never forget. It all started when I noticed something strange happening in our neighborhood. Every night, without fail, the lights at her house would flicker and dim, and her Tesla would be parked right next to the electrical box. At first, I thought maybe it was just a coincidence, but soon I realized she was charging her electric car off the community's shared power supply. Now, you might be wondering, what's the big deal? Well, in our HOA, electricity is carefully managed, and what she was doing wasn't just rude, it was flat-out stealing. She was taking advantage of everyone else's hard-earned money, and no matter how many times I confronted her or reported it, she just kept on charging. I tried talking to the HOA about it, but they were too slow to act. So I took matters into my own hands. What I did next? Well, let's just say she learned the hard way that you don't mess with the wrong neighbor. But was it worth it? That's where the real story begins. Stay tuned for what happened when my plan kicked into high gear. I tried to handle things the right way at first. I talked to her directly, hoping she'd realize the impact she was having. But her attitude was always the same, dismissive and entitled. It's just a little bit of power, no big deal, she would say, brushing off any concerns like it was a minor inconvenience. I even went to the HOA, hoping they'd take action, but as usual, they were slow to respond, and nothing changed. Meanwhile, the situation kept getting worse. She'd park her Tesla by the power box almost every evening, sometimes late into the night, and I could hear the hum of the charging station running long after most people had gone to bed. It felt like a slap in the face. The HOA's inaction made me realize that, if I wanted something done, I'd have to take control of the situation myself. I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do at first, but I knew one thing: she couldn't just keep getting away with it. I started researching how I could make her stop without directly confronting her again. What I discovered would end up being a game changer, something so unexpected, it would turn her world upside down. But here's the kicker: would it even work? Would she finally learn her lesson, or would I end up making things worse? As the days went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that the HOA Karen wasn't just inconveniencing me, but everyone around her. Other neighbors started to notice the increased energy consumption too. I could hear them grumbling about their rising electricity bills, even though they weren't using any extra power. But none of them seemed to know what was really going on, and I wasn't about to be the one to spill the beans and risk becoming a target. Instead, I quietly kept an eye on her and started tracking the odd patterns of her Tesla charging. I wasn't the only one frustrated. A few of the other neighbors had their own stories to tell. One guy, Greg, mentioned that his lights had been flickering for weeks, and he thought it was just his old wiring. But after chatting with some of the other residents, he realized something wasn't right. It was like the whole neighborhood was turning into a collection of complaints, but nobody had the guts to do anything about it. In the meantime, I felt like I was the only one who really cared. The HOA was a joke. They barely even acknowledged the issue. I had put in a formal complaint, but I knew it would take weeks, maybe even months, before they acted. By then, it could be too late. I couldn't just wait around for the HOA to figure things out, and every time I tried to confront her, she'd either laugh it off or accuse me of being petty. The nerve of it. That's when I decided to go deeper into my plan. I had done some research into power surges, small, controlled surges of electricity that could potentially damage sensitive electronics. What if I could make her stop charging her Tesla without causing a scene? What if I could disrupt her power without her even knowing it was me? It was risky, sure, but I wasn't dealing with an ordinary person. This wasn't just about a neighbor who was cutting corners. It was about someone who had no respect for anyone else's property or rules. The more I thought about it, the more it seemed like the perfect solution. I could install a device that would trigger a power surge and fry her battery, all while making it look like a freak accident. She'd get the message loud and clear, and I wouldn't have to do anything more than wait for the inevitable fallout. But as I set my plan into motion, a creeping sense of doubt started to creep in. What if things didn't go according to plan? What if I ended up causing more damage than I intended? And worse, what if someone else got caught in the crossfire? A sudden surge could mess up more than just her Tesla. What if it affected the whole block? What if she figured out it was me, and things got personal? The tension kept building as I started putting the pieces together. I had to act fast, but the consequences of what I was about to do were starting to weigh on me. I couldn't back out now. Too much had already been set into motion. But would I regret it once I saw the damage it caused? The worst part, I wasn't even sure what I would do once it was done. Would it be enough to stop her from charging her car off the grid, or would she find a way to keep getting away with it? And more importantly, was this really the solution I wanted, or was I just sinking to her level? I was getting closer to the point of no return, and everything was riding on how I handled the next few days. Would this really be the end of her power theft, or was I about to make things a whole lot worse? The days leading up to the moment when I would carry out my plan felt like a ticking time bomb. Each time I saw her pull into the driveway and park next to the power box, my frustration would bubble up again. I kept watching her, trying to stay calm and stick to my plan, but I couldn't shake the nagging thought that this was more than just a simple act of rebellion. I had put myself in a dangerous position. Was I really ready to cross this line? The night before I was set to act, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept racing through every possible outcome. What if she noticed something was off? What if I triggered a surge that hit not just her car, but the entire neighborhood? There were so many variables. The last thing I wanted was to be caught in the middle of an escalating situation where I was the one left holding the bag. I had double-checked everything. The device was set up, and I had taken extra care to make sure there would be no immediate trace back to me. Still, something felt off. This wasn't just about messing with her Tesla. This was about making a point. And in the back of my mind, I kept wondering if I was just as bad as she was for taking things this far. The night arrived, and the tension was unbearable. The whole neighborhood was quiet, the calm before the storm. I saw her Tesla roll in at its usual time, parked by the power box. I watched from my window, heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the faint hum of the charging station. This was it. I knew she'd never expect what was coming. I waited until the perfect moment, when the power draw was at its peak. My finger hovered over the switch, and for a split second, I hesitated. Could I really go through with this? Was I about to wreck her entire battery, and with it, any chance of us ever having peace? But then, I remembered how many times I had tried to go the right route. I had been patient. I had tried to follow the rules. Yet here I was, pushed to this point by someone who didn't seem to care about anyone but herself. I pulled the trigger. The power surged through the system in an instant, and I heard a loud, almost deafening pop from her side of the street. My heart dropped. The surge had hit harder than I expected, and there was a sharp crackling sound followed by the faint scent of burning plastic. I couldn't see much from my window, but I knew something had gone horribly wrong. Had I done enough damage to her car? Was she going to realize it was linked to the power surge? Was it all going to unravel? For what felt like an eternity, I waited. The street was eerily silent, but I could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. The quiet seemed to stretch on forever. Then I saw the flicker of her lights. The hum of the charging station had stopped. My gut twisted as I watched her walk outside, probably wondering what had just happened. I could almost hear her voice in my head, complaining about how something always goes wrong when she tries to get ahead. But it wasn't over yet. I hadn't seen the full fallout. Would she figure out it was me, or would the situation spiral into something far worse than I had anticipated? As she stood there, staring at the powerless charging station, I held my breath. I knew that the moment she realized her car wasn't charging, she'd go straight to the HOA. Would they take action now? Would I be exposed, or was my plan a success? My heart pounded as I waited, the clock ticking down to the moment of truth. I watched from my window, barely breathing, as she paced back and forth in front of her Tesla, inspecting it like she was trying to solve a mystery. The seconds felt like hours. I kept telling myself it was just a car battery malfunction, that she'd be frustrated, but eventually figure out how to fix it. But deep down, I knew this wasn't going to end that easily. Her pride and entitlement made me certain she wouldn't just let it slide. Suddenly, I saw her walk toward her front door. I thought maybe she was just going inside to grab something, but the next thing I knew, she was on her phone. My stomach sank. There was no doubt in my mind now. She was going to call for help. But who would she call? The HOA? An electrician? Or worse, someone who might trace the problem back to the shared power line. The possibility of everything falling apart weighed heavily on me. I stayed in my spot, glued to the window, watching her every move. She was talking quickly into her phone, her gestures exaggerated and frantic. I could tell she was escalating the situation, turning it into a bigger deal than it really was. That's when I heard it, the low rumble of a car engine approaching. My heart skipped a beat. I looked out to see a black truck pulling up to her driveway. It was an unfamiliar vehicle, but it didn't take long to realize who it was. My neighbor Greg, the one who had mentioned his flickering lights earlier, was pulling up in his truck, looking like he was in a hurry. He parked next to her driveway, then got out, his face tight with concern. My mind was racing. What was going on? Why was Greg suddenly involved? I couldn't shake the sinking feeling that this was about to get much worse. It wasn't just the HOA Karen anymore. Now it looked like I might have dragged an innocent neighbor into this mess. Greg walked up to her, and I saw her point to her Tesla, likely explaining what had happened. They talked for a moment before he went over to the car and started inspecting the charging port. I was losing it. This was spiraling out of control faster than I could process. Greg was smart. He knew about electrical issues. What if he started asking questions or poking around too much? What if he figured out that something was wrong with the power line itself? Worse, what if he linked it to me? He was already suspicious of the lights, and now with her car down, he might start putting the pieces together. My hands were clammy as I watched Greg check the connection, tapping his phone screen to search for a solution. What if he was an expert, and this whole thing backfired? What if, in his attempt to help, he discovered the surge I'd triggered? I couldn't risk it. If Greg put two and two together, I could kiss any chance of staying under the radar goodbye. Just as I was about to act, maybe even go out there to warn Greg, I heard the unmistakable sound of another engine. This time, it was a much larger vehicle, and it pulled in with authority. My blood ran cold as I recognized the unmistakable logo on the side. It was the HOA's maintenance crew. They had finally come out to investigate, no doubt after hearing about the issue from Karen or Greg. Panic flooded through me. This was the moment I had feared. Now, the HOA wasn't just a passive observer. They were actively involved. I could already imagine the scene. They'd start poking around, checking the power lines, and they might even find the evidence I was desperately trying to hide. Everything I had done up to this point was at risk of crumbling right before my eyes. I had to think quickly. But as I saw the maintenance crew pull up and start unloading equipment, I realized something. There was no way I could back out now. The storm had already hit. It was only a matter of time before the pieces started to fall into place, and when they did, there'd be no going back.